Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Tuesday, June 11th, 2024. Time for another show. And if you live in a place where this is applicable or applicable, depending on your pronunciation, Tuesday, have you got any primaries going on? I'll find out tomorrow when I speak with Greg, and he reminds me of what's going on and what has happened in the last day or so. And I'm trying to think ahead to all this. The Virginia primaries happen next week, end next week. Now there's no longer any point in saying when election day is, but they do print it on the calendar, at least the national election day, and on the refrigerator non-NAFTA U.S. focused calendar that we have these days. Although I guess it's some sort of weird fiscal year calendar because it ends soon and I have to go and get a new one. Not really sure how that one happened. Anyway, back on the air today, and it's a Tuesday. I'm not certain what our schedule is with respect to Joan McCarter. I know she was taking a couple of weeks off and resting up and taking in the summer relaxation, etc. And I think we were supposed to be off for 2 weeks, and I think those 2 weeks have passed, but maybe it just feels like 2 weeks, so I'm not 100% sure. And we'll see. And if it's just a fantastic treat that we get to talk to her at the end of the show, then great. Otherwise, we wait once again. The government won't shut down this week. So, what else is there for us to talk about? All right. Note here from Mom. Hey, Mom. How you doing? Tells me the South Carolina primaries are today. That's why there was the big Nancy Mace profile that I decided not to put aside. Too long didn't read on her. She's a kook, and what are you going to do? Anyway, it was an interesting piece in it, how she turned from one particular kind of kook into another particular kind of kook, and now she's just seems to be universally acknowledged as the worst boss on Capitol Hill, and somebody who's been through 3 entire staff turnovers in the short time that she's been there. And apparently the word is from everybody that she's driven to distraction by her mission of becoming the most famous person on Capitol Hill. It doesn't matter whether she has policy positions or not. To the extent that that policy positions get her on television, she will adopt one. But in the meantime, she's just mostly interested in creating controversy and becoming the focus of the camera lens for whatever reason, to no particular legislative end, apparently, but interesting. And it'll make you think, what a terrible person. And then it might make you think, what's even worse is I might be represented by that person. My mom. So anyway, that gives you something to do for the day, although you're not going to be participating in the Republican primary there, I'm pretty sure. But you can hope that she breaks a heel and falls down on her way to vote, and everybody captures that on camera. And then she decides that being followed around by cameras is not just a great thing after all. Maybe. I don't know. Is that an outcome we can hope for? All right. The voice is on the mend. I got a email yesterday from longtime correspondent, frequent correspondent, Jeremy Freiberger, who said to me yesterday, you said last Thursday that your voice was failing you. And on Monday, you said, I'm still not right. But on both days, to the listeners, or at least to Jeremy, and maybe to a lot of you, it sounded like everything's pretty normal. And Thursday wasn't the worst voice day. And Monday, it was okay. But the suggestion is, and I think it's probably correct, that inside your own head, your voice always sounds different to you than it does to other people. I hate the way I sound on tape. Right. And the reason is because your voice sounds different outside your head. But if your head is also filled with fluid, then, it will change your voice, sometimes outwardly, but certainly inwardly. That could have been the case. I really should have. I thought briefly about making some recordings over the weekend just so you could hear how crazy the voice had gotten. Although maybe it would have turned out, people would have said, it's not that crazy. It's definitely different. But it was a wild weekend, and a lot of whispering and a lot of voice cracking, and it still does from time to time. But anyway, so things are on the mend, and that's good news. In other news, I don't know. We're having a presidential election. One of the candidates is a criminal. Various other things that are terrible are happening. Oh, look, I did put aside the Nancy Mace profile. It's very long, though, but it's in Slate magazine. I'll give you a taste of what's going on. I don't think we can justify. I mean, I guess if she loses her primary, then we definitely made the right choice, and it was a waste of time to talk about her. If she wins her primary, she's probably going to anyway, and we got this wackadoodle hanging around. It's enough to know that she's a weirdo, and I don't know, a couple of stories have broken through on her on the air here on the show. The suspicion that she spray painted her own sidewalk in order to gain attention / sympathy as having been attacked for her political beliefs. But that was kind of tepid. She kind of half-assed that one. And then there was the time that she joined up with the Freedom Caucus people to try to throw Kevin McCarthy out of office, even though she has no connection with those people whatsoever. She's taken to dressing up in ways that garner a lot of attention, too. This piece that I was thinking of is in Slate magazine, slate.com, The Unraveling of Nancy Mace. So that's a tempting title. The Tumultuous Inside Story of the Thirstiest Member of Congress by Jim Newell. So, this is the angle he's taken on these things. And it's pretty good. Now, I can tell you, I've run out of free articles. Wow. At Slate Magazine on June 11th. Well, I don't know. They may have like 3 free articles or 1 for all I know. But I can read you the pocket version, certainly. I'll give you a sense of what's going on in the first couple paragraphs. Anyway, last October, when Kevin McCarthy was ousted as Speaker of the House, one Republican of the 8 who voted against him stood out as the odd bedfellow of the group, a junior representative from South Carolina named Nancy Mace. The 7 other Republicans, all men, were far-right rabble-rousers, loudmouths for whom grousing about the, quote, establishment rather than working with it was always the right political move. They were used to attracting attention and capitalizing on press attention. Yet in the days that followed McCarthy's ouster, Mace outshone them all, showing up for work in a shirt with a red A on the front, a nod to the titular symbol of the scarlet letter. Anyway, I don't know. I remember seeing that and thinking, it had a gigantic red letter A, scarlet, if you will, letter A on the shirt, not just sort of like over the breast pocket kind of thing. And it actually looked more like she was trying to dress up as Captain America or something like that than being evocative of the scarlet letter. And, of course, the metaphor just didn't work. But anyway, her staff, picking up the pieces from Mace's bombshell vote against McCarthy the previous week, was completely baffled, that is, by the shirt. I thought it was just some fashion statement, one staffer recalled. I was like, okay, well, maybe this is an Abercrombie shirt or something. That sounds pretty Zoomer generation. But okay, only after seeing Mace on camera at a meeting of the House of Representatives, or the meeting of House Republicans anyway, swarmed by reporters, did the staffer put it together. The scarlet letter outfit was another attempt by her to be part of the story. Or, as a second staffer remembered, it was an attempt to become the star of the story. She wanted every single person to think, when they thought of the McCarthy ouster vote, not to think of the 8, but to think of Nancy Mace, the staffer said. In her own explanation for the scarlet letter that day, Mace lamented that she had been, quote, demonized for my vote and for my voice, and would, quote, do the right thing every single time, no matter the consequences. Now, probably because she was not being ostracized for, say, having a child out of wedlock in 17th century Massachusetts. Many people did not quite understand the connection Mace was making to the Nathaniel Hawthorne staple of high school English class. Mace, closely monitoring their reaction to her stunt, privately griped to her staff that those who didn't get it weren't smart. They were probably, quote, Trump voters, she said. Where does she think she fits in on this spectrum? It's very odd. But most of the bafflement was about why Mace had voted against McCarthy in the first place. She hadn't, after all, put up any roadblocks to his dragged-out election as Speaker 9 months before. She wasn't allied with any of the Freedom Caucus-adjacent politicians who wanted McCarthy out. She'd called the anti-McCarthy ringleader of Florida, Representative Matt Gaetz, a fraud during the first Speaker fight in January. Neither her tactics nor her politics tended to the extreme. Nevertheless, there she was, not merely giving leadership an earful, but joining an unprecedented ouster of the man who'd fundraised for her and worked with her office to help her pass legislation. As one former senior McCarthy aide dryly put it to me about her vote against McCarthy, she surprised us. These days, Congress is full of show horses who are less interested in the gradual heads-down rise in the ranks than in rocketing to viral celebrity, however many enemies they may make along the way. But only 3.5 years in, Mace has established herself as one of the thirstiest members of Congress in her unceasing quest for attention. She's kept everyone from lay congressional watchers to reporters to her staff to the Speaker of the House and Donald Trump on their toes, I don't think so, about her next move. What she may do on any given day feels downright random, even to the people closest to her. But it isn't quite random. In interviews with 8 former Mace staffers, of which there are several dozen because Mace's Washington office has an exceptionally high turnover rate, the politician's obsession with getting press was described as her sole motivational force. The former staffers were granted anonymity for fear of reprisal. Mace's office ignored repeated interview requests, which is amazing for her, for this story, because it didn't want to seem like she was agreeing that she was the thirstiest member of Congress. Anyway, the former staffers described how every move, however incongruous it may seem, is part of a larger effort for Mace to build her brand as a, quote, caucus of one, as Mace herself puts it. Sometimes it works. Attention can be translated into power, but it has also alienated Mace from colleagues and GOP leaders. It lost her an entire D.C. staff over the course of a few months, culminating in a surreal episode involving the Capitol Police in December. Her McCarthy vote, followed up by the Scarlet Letter stunt, was so egregious that it earned Mace a primary challenger, I guess they'll settle that tomorrow, in a race that will be decided this week, in fact, tomorrow, or today, and we'll know the results tomorrow, probably, unless somehow fraud, everybody needs to have a recount for 10 weeks. Even if she advances, as she's favored to, rebuilding her reputation in the House will not be easy. A former senior staffer said Mace used to trash members like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and Gaetz for being in the Capitol just to make noise. Now, the staffer said she had turned herself into what she hates. But I bet she hates it less. She just hates it when other people do it. Only a few days into her first term in Congress, Mace wanted to get punched in the face, which, I'm sure she could probably arrange, but she tried and failed in her first couple days. This was January 6th, 2021, when there were people around willing to punch people in the face. And Mace was desperate for headlines about herself amid the news of the Capitol riot. I mean, it's funny. She couldn't generate one in all this. As has been previously reported, during the attack, she pitched her staff on a plan to put herself in harm's way in order to get hit by a protester. A move that would result in massive media attention, maybe even enough to elevate her as a top anti-Trump Republican. Several months before, in November of 2020, Mace had narrowly defeated Democratic Representative Joe Cunningham in a swing district covering much of the South Carolina Lowcountry. Before that, she had been a state legislator and had worked in commercial real estate and public relations. She was most well known, however, for being the first woman cadet to graduate from the Citadel. Remember that bastion of honor and freedom that we read about the other day that was okay with the other January 6th Friday? That would have been something. Now, that's a story. A Citadel cadet has come to Washington and punched the first woman Citadel graduate in the face. That might have been an interesting story. Well, anyway, this all true, and blah, blah, blah. First woman cadet to graduate from Citadel Military College. I probably shouldn't yada yada that, but it's Nancy Mace. So, an experience that she chronicled in a 2001 memoir. So it's been like 20 years since anybody wanted her memoirs. That's the problem. Though she never went through with the getting punched plan, Mace earned a significant amount of coverage for her outspokenness against Trump following January 6th, the day after the Capitol riot. Mace, who had worked for Trump's 2016 South Carolina campaign, so it's, kind of weird to show up as the anti-Trump. I want to be the leader of the anti-Trump faction. The guy whose campaign I worked on. Said in a television interview, everything that he's worked for, his entire legacy, was wiped out yesterday, and we've got to start over. She did not vote for Trump's impeachment, despite sharing, in a floor speech, her belief that, quote, we need to hold the president accountable. I hold him accountable for the events that transpired for the attack on our Capitol last Wednesday, but then again, I really don't, I guess. I mean, how can you say that and then not vote for impeachment? But she's crazy. It didn't take too long for the pendulum to swing in the opposite direction. Within a month, she was picking a fight with a proper Capitol Hill star on the left, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She gets attention. If I fight her, I'll be in the newspaper. Over what had happened on January 6th. That landed Mace an appearance on Fox News. The idea was always to get her front and center in the national spotlight, and the media element drove the legislative element. One senior staffer said of Mace's tack, her staff would try to hold 30-minute legislative meetings once a week with the congresswoman, but she would get bored, and within 10 minutes, she would just kind of fall back into media strategy. And that was from day one. It was just like, how do I get into the national story? How do I get into the national spotlight? So that should give you a pretty good sense of what's going on. As I said, it's a very long article, and we could spend an awful lot of time on it, but I think you get the idea. It gives you a pretty good picture of where she's at. And if you're interested in such a story, or you live in her district and you just want to be extra motivated to go out there and, I don't know, you won't be voting in the Republican primary, but maybe you want to, I don't know, throw trash and garbage at her if you see her. I suppose it's illegal. You can't do that. But maybe you would be so motivated and you could just write, you could journal about it. How about that? And now you'll have good fodder to do it with. So there you go. So Jim Newell in Slate magazine with the latest profile on her, and there's been a couple more. Let's see. I mentioned a few other things that were happening that might warrant some attention. Some international news. I just happened to catch this on the radio on the way to the keyboard. That it's important internationally, but not a huge domestic story here in the United States, but just want to note for the record that the Vice President of Malawi has died in a plane crash. A doctor. I don't know what kind of doctor, whether it's a PhD or not, but Dr. Saulos Chilima, who's the Vice President of Malawi and has been killed in a plane crash, and 9 other people, including his wife, on board. Wow. So National Day of Mourning in Malawi, as well as primary elections in South Carolina today. I don't know. That's very incongruous. But, legitimate world leader killed in a plane crash. I feel like if I didn't say something, people would say, what do you not care about Malawi? And who wants to answer that question? All right. Back at home, I don't know. There's no transition from something like that. I happened to check my email today looking for other inputs, various stories that might come up. And as usual, the House Democratic Whip has provided me with a preview of the day's action on the House floor. By the way, who's the Democratic Whip these days? Catherine Clark. I had no idea. It used to be, of course, now, of course, here I am blanking on who was the Clymer, right? James Clymer from South Carolina. So that's why, again, my mind went there. But he had stepped down. Now it's Catherine Clark, who is the Democratic Whip, sending the daily or nightly preview of Tuesday's floor action. Tuesday, usually a travel day. The day that members of Congress arrive, the week for the rest of us starts Monday. You know the story about that. And so the calendar very frequently full of suspensions on Tuesday, except I haven't really been looking at that. I haven't looked at the whip schedule for quite a while. I just, on a lark, decided to look at it today to see what it was like, because all the bills that they do are suspension bills these days. They now are very frequently forced to pass substantive important bills by the suspension of the rules procedure because of the lack of control over the Republican caucus or conference, as they like to say it, and they need Democratic votes in order to pass things. But this Tuesday looks like a list of the usual kind of suspensions. Back when they were working under regular order and passing bills under regular order, Tuesday would be full of things like this. And it's also usually full of bills that members of Congress have striven mightily to name something clever with some clever acronym. So a lot of capital letters in the roundup of the suspension bills usually. And, you know, this one's not so particularly egregious, but I'm just sometimes curious about what's being offered here. Here's the first one on the list here is the SPUR Act. And if you click on the links, you know, it'll bring you to the text of the bill. And provided the page actually loads, which I see we're having trouble with again, then you can tell you're scrolling down and looking at the title to see what is the SPUR Act. But the one that really caught my attention was at the end of the list, which this one too is now not going to open up. All right. They got some real problems over at TweetDeck, I guess. And, or not TweetDeck, but Blue Sky's deck. And I think it's ruining everything. All right. Well, let me mark some of these things and we can come back to that story later. Of course, now it's going to be difficult to read any story. That's fantastic. Anyway, what now? I'm going to have to go to the other computer and the other screen and open up Pocket and see what we can see while the pinwheel spins here for a while. This has been interesting stuff. Let's see. What I picked up this morning includes another article asking the same question we're all asking: is Donald Trump okay? I mean, most people who ask that question kind of hope that he isn't. At least on this show, we know he's not, and we're just fine with him. Oh, I don't know, say, you know, dropping dead at some point in the near future. But so far, no luck. Let me try. The problem with using the other screen, of course, is that the passwords are not in on that computer, and we very frequently find, okay, that we can't get into the things to which we actually subscribe. But here we go from the Washington Post. Eugene Robinson, the latest to weigh in on what the hell's wrong with Donald Trump's brain. His story about hypothetically being electrocuted is another glimpse into a mind that is unwell. Greg told us about this from his 110 degrees in the shade rally in Las Vegas over the weekend, and telling the story of not being sure what to do if he were trapped on a sinking electric boat surrounded by sharks, which I am rooting for daily, but it just never seems to happen with him. It's irresponsible, says Eugene Robinson, to obsess over President Biden's tendency to mangle a couple of words in a speech while Donald Trump is out there sounding detached from reality. Biden, who is old, at least makes sense. Trump, who is also old, rants like someone you'd cross the street to avoid. Yeah, well, that's kind of the point. We in the media have failed by becoming inured to Trump's verbal incontinence, not just the rapid-fire lies and revenge-seeking threats, which are a story in their own right, I would say, but also the frightening glimpses into a mind that is evidently unwell. In 2016, Trump said outrageous things at his campaign rallies to be entertaining. In 2024, his tangents raised serious questions about his mental fitness. And, of course, as I always remind everybody, raise serious questions about whether his kids are engaged in elder abuse by milking this cash cow who clearly needs to be in protective care somewhere. His rally on Sunday in Las Vegas offered a grim smorgasbord of examples, but the obvious standout, and not in a good way, is the story he told about being aboard a hypothetical electric-powered boat. And by the way, there have been electric-powered boats since forever. That's not actually even a new development. That's not like a new electric vehicle innovation. They're quite old and have been around for a very long time. Anyway, he posits that the battery would be so heavy that it would cause the craft to sink. Now, he's clearly unaware that you can carry a tremendous load on boats these days. I mean, container ships full of cars. How does he think they float? I mean, it's too heavy to float. We have boats, man. They get with the times. Like, it's been a long time since the cargo was very heavy and could be carried by a boat anyway. So, like, all right. Well, the battery would be so heavy it would cause the craft to sink. And he relates his purported conversation, he's lying about that, I'm sure, with a knowledgeable mariner about this scenario. That can't be true. Bear with me, but it's worth reading the passage in full. And Greg told us a little bit about this one. Might even have read the whole thing to us yesterday. I say, what would happen if the boat sank from its weight? And you're in the boat and you have this tremendously powerful battery. Well, it's no more powerful than any other battery, but anyway. And the battery's now underwater. And there's this shark that's approximately 10 yards over there. By the way, as there's nowhere in this does he ever wonder, would the shark get electrocuted? I mean, why not? But by the way, a lot of shark attacks lately. Do you notice that? A lot of sharks. I watched some guys justifying it today. You remember this whole passage. That, well, they weren't really angry. They bit off the young lady's leg because of the fact that they were not hungry, but misunderstood who she was. And, of course, Donald Trump, I guess, at that point, probably liable to bite off a young lady's leg at any given moment. Well, anyway, but I only repeat this because of how stupid it sounds. But, yeah, these people are crazy. He said there's no problem with sharks. They just didn't really understand this young woman swimming. No, it really got decimated, and other people, too. A lot of shark attacks. So I said, there's a shark 10 yards away from the boat. You remember this whole setup? All right. Well, we'll do the Eugene Robinson payoff after this short break. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, where we left off was the middle of Eugene Robinson realizing what the rest of us have already realized, but saying it in Eugene Robinson fashion, and so that's always worth paying attention to. That Donald Trump is maybe suffering from brainworms himself. He may actually have turned into a brainworm entirely. We really don't know what's going on in his head. And that he spent a long time rambling in particular about being faced with the hypothetical dilemma of not knowing whether to jump off of an electric boat that's sinking because he's afraid of being electrocuted or being eaten by a shark 10 yards away. And this is what he's spending his time with. He's running for president, and he's on criminal trial. No current trials actually underway, but facing criminal trial in 3 other venues, of course, for attempting to overthrow the government of the United States, stealing nuclear secrets from the United States, et cetera, routine stuff for a presidential campaign. And, of course, facing sentencing shortly enough in his conviction on 34 counts in the New York trial. Okay, but now he's telling the people of Las Vegas, who have, I would say, probably fewer sharks per capita in Las Vegas than most places, given that it's, inland. But he says to the guy he's not really talking to because he's making the whole thing up, there's a shark 10 yards away from the boat. 10 yards or here. Do I get electrocuted if the boat is sinking? Water goes over the battery. The boat is sinking. Do I stay on top of the boat and get electrocuted, or do I jump over by the shark and not get electrocuted? Because I will tell you, he didn't know the answer. He said, as if they really would have such a conversation, nobody's ever asked me that question, which is actually me. If there really were such a conversation, that's the guy politely saying, you actually should be hospitalized. No, you know what? No one's ever asked me that question. I said, I think it's a good question. Well, that's okay. You think drinking bleach is a good idea. So you think this is a good question. I think that there's a lot of electric current coming through that water. But you know what I'd do if there was a shark or you get electrocuted? I'd take electrocution every single time. And believe me, there are a lot of people thinking that you should take electrocution. That's absolutely the right choice for you. In fact, every time I think of you as a sitting president, I think of you sitting and taking electrocution in that chair. But anyway, he says, I'm not getting near the shark, so we're going to end that. We're going to end it for boats, and we're going to end it for trucks, which frequently run into shark attack, of course. And you're really, honestly, the boat's sinking. You got a lot of troubles. It's not because your boat was electric. Although, again, in his mind, your boat is sinking because the battery is too heavy, not because it's filled with 10,000 cars. Sure. Trucks, back to Eugene Robinson. He's actually talking about the transition to electric vehicles, which he has vowed to halt. That entire hallucination is part of Trump's rationale for one of his major policy positions. Trump has told the electrocution or shark story at least once before at a rally in Iowa last October. People probably keeping tapes of it like Grateful Dead shows. Ooh, I remember back in Iowa when he told the shark or electrocution story. Stormy Daniels, the adult film actress who received $130,000 in hush money to keep quiet about her sexual encounter with Trump, a payment that led to the former president's conviction on 34 felony charges, by the way, has said that Trump is obsessed with sharks, terrified of sharks. I remember that. Way back in 2013, he declared on Twitter, sharks are last on my list, other than perhaps the losers and haters of the world. Okay, so what? The White House press corps would be in wolf pack mode if Biden were in the middle of a speech and suddenly veered into gibberish about boats and sharks. There would be front page stories questioning whether the president at 81 was suffering from dementia. And the op-ed pages would be filled with thumbsuckers about whether Vice President Harris and the cabinet should invoke the 25th Amendment. House Republicans would already have scheduled hearings on Biden's mental condition. I think they actually might be trying to do that, and demanded that he take a cognitive test. The tendency with Trump at 77 is to say he's just being Trump, but he's like this all the time. Also during the Las Vegas speech, Trump tried to deny the allegation by one of his White House chiefs of staff, retired Marine General John F. Kelly. And remember how we in America are trained to regard former Marine generals, not just generals, but Marine generals. Kelly refused, he says, in 2018 to visit, he's telling the story of Trump refusing in 2018 to visit an American military cemetery in France. Remember that was in the news recently because the D-Day remembrances. And he refused to visit the American military cemetery in France, saying it was filled with suckers and losers. Trump told the crowd on Sunday that only a psycho or a crazy person or a very stupid person would say such a thing while I'm standing there with generals and military people in the cemetery. Well, that might be true. And yet he said it. But he wasn't standing there with anybody. He never went to the cemetery. Except in his mind, perhaps, which is a much bigger problem than Biden fumbling a name or garbling a sentence. Okay. Well, thanks for catching up with the rest of us. It's always good to note when somebody who's got the eye, I guess, of many millions of readers catches up with us and figures things out and is willing to say so in the mainstream voice. One of the mainstream voices of America, the Washington Post. Okay, so I think the issues on the other computer screen have resolved themselves, and I can tell you about the various suspension bills. Most of them incredibly boring. The first one on the list, as I mentioned, the SPUR Act. Just curious what that might stand for. As it turns out, it is the Small Business Procurement and Utilization Reform Act, really trying to turn it into SPUR. Now, again, small business procurement. That's SBP. But they just dropped the word business and go to small procurement, I guess. when making the acronyms. SPUR. It doesn't actually work because they drop one of the words. And I mean, why not just say, this is the I Am Awesome Act? What does it stand for? I don't know. It's about manufacture of plastics in the United States. None of the letters work, but what can I tell you? I wanted to spell this instead. That's not quite that bad, but Small Business Procurement and Utilization Reform Act. What's utilization reform mean? I don't know. Nothing. It's not a real thing. It's just a throwaway word at this point. I don't know what the act does. You don't know. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's not that long of a bill, but I don't know. Is a bill to include requirements relating to new small business entrants in the scorecard program and for other purposes. So what does it have to do with utilization, much less the reform of utilization? Nothing whatsoever. But, there you go. Does utilization even come up anywhere else in the bill? I don't think so. What's scorecard? The term scorecard, by the way, means any summary using a rating system to evaluate the efforts of a federal agency to meet goals established under subsection G1B that includes the measures described in paragraph 2. You see that there's nothing happening here. Anyway, more to the point, if there really is one, about the use of the dumb acronyms, is the last one on the list. What other acronym ones? There's the Think Differently About Disability Employment Act, and differently is all capitalized, which makes me think they're trying to acronymize that. How do they get to that? Let's see, the short title. This act may be cited as the Think Differently About Disability Employment Act. Why must it be thought of that way? This one, I think, doesn't even try to justify it. It just says, we would like it to be called Think Differently in all caps. Maybe it's not supposed to be an acronym. They just wanted to capitalize it so that you would think about the word differently. Okay. And then lastly, as I mentioned, one more, the last one on the list was, I wasn't really sure how to pronounce this one. It's WIPPES, which, is that wipes with an extra P, or is that WIPPES, or I don't know. And I was like, well, maybe that's genuinely an acronym from what they're trying to do and not some forced acronym. But nope, it's a forced acronym, and yup, it's WIPES. This is a bill to require the Federal Trade Commission to issue regulations requiring certain products to have, quote, do not flush labeling and for other purposes. So yes, it's about wipes. This act may be cited as the Wastewater Infrastructure Pollution Prevention and Environmental Safety Act, or the WIPPES Act. Wow. So that's just tremendous. Everyone loves that. In general, just so you know, a covered entity shall label a covered product clearly and conspicuously with the label, notice, and symbol in accordance with the subsections B and C. So they're going to have a do not flush symbol, the universal do not flush symbol. And then I guess, all right, I think what they're talking about here is people are flushing antibacterial type counter wipes down the toilet, of course, because they have fully flushable wipes out there on the market that are for use in the bathroom. Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? And people are like, well, what's the difference? They're both these sort of weird, white-ish, I don't know what kind of material. One's a wipe, the other's a wipe. Surely it's fine to flush anything that is similarly shaped down the toilet. And apparently it's not. And, this is a major problem. And okay, so they're working on the WIPPES Act today. They might not get to it. They might stretch things out until tomorrow. Just wanted to let you know what they were working on, and the major problems that faced our Congress and how they were addressing them today. All right. There's more. Another morning entrant, also in the Washington Post, also in the opinion section, infrequent columnist here, not Eugene Robinson, but this time Merrick Garland, who's very busy with some other things, and publishes this opinion piece: unfounded attacks on the Justice Department must end. They must. So there you have it. You have been told that they must end. I sympathize. He's right. This is a voice that ordinarily should be speaking up against these things, and then and that voice should be heeded. But now it's Merrick Garland, and the people he's talking about have no intention whatsoever of ever listening to Merrick Garland about anything. And so now we have this. It's imperative that they must end, but so what? No one who's actually perpetrating these attacks is going to end them. Certainly not on Merrick Garland's word. But I don't know. I'm not even... I feel bad because I feel like, well, you should pay Merrick Garland the courtesy of reading his opinion. But what's it going to say? It's going to say it's bad when conspiracy theories, falsehoods, and threats of violence against DOJ personnel happen. They are not normal. That's the subheader, and tells us that. And there's a couple of interesting examples. Anyway, last week, a California man was convicted of threatening to bomb an FBI field office where hundreds of agents and other employees work. One of his threats to the FBI, the man wrote, "I can go on a mass murder spree. In fact, it would be very explainable by your actions." So it's going to blame it on Merrick Garland himself. These heinous threats of violence have become routine in an environment in which the Justice Department is under attack like never before. In recent weeks, we've seen an escalation of attacks that go far beyond public scrutiny, criticism, and legitimate and necessary oversight of our work. They're baseless, personal, and dangerous. These attacks come in the form of threats to defund particular department investigations. So now he's talking about the congressional threats against them as well. Most recently, the special counsel's prosecution of the former president. So not just calling in bomb threats. This is an interesting segue. And I mean, there was no segue there. And turning directly to, the threats are coming from inside the House, so to speak. That is the House of Representatives. They also, of course, come in the form of conspiracy theories crafted and spread for the purpose of undermining public trust in the judicial process itself. Those include false claims that a case brought by a local district attorney and resolved by a jury verdict in a state trial, which one? Wink, wink, I think you know, was somehow controlled by the Justice Department. Yeah, that's the latest thing. I mean, easy to guess that they would be thinking this, that Joe Biden and Merrick Garland and the feds coordinated the conviction of Donald Trump on 34 state criminal counts, prosecuted by the Manhattan District Attorney. Yeah, but, they control him. By what mechanism? I mean, it's a totally different level of government. Yeah, but for people who think that the president not only is, but ought to be all powerful and have immunity from everything, these guys just believe that the federal government is all powerful and can do anything. Unless, of course, it's trying to do that to them. Then, in which case, they say, that's unconstitutional, surely. But if my guy wants to do it to my competitor or neighbor, that's what the federal government should be doing. Anyway, so you get the idea. They come in the form of efforts to bully and intimidate our career public servants by repeatedly and publicly singling them out. They come in the form of false claims that the department is politicizing its work to somehow influence the outcome of an election. Such claims are often made by those who are themselves attempting to politicize the department's work. What? To influence the outcome of an election. And media reports indicate there's an ongoing effort to ramp up these attacks against the Justice Department, its work, and its employees. We will not be intimidated by these attacks. Well, that's good. But it is absurd and dangerous that public servants, many of whom risk their lives every day, are being threatened for simply doing their jobs and adhering to the principles that have long guided the Justice Department's work. In my first job at the Justice Department some 45 years ago, I worked on what would become the department's first edition of the Principles of Federal Prosecution. That set rules for prosecutors, enshrined what every department employee lives by every single day, an unwavering commitment to the fair and impartial application of our laws. That commitment has been sustained by dedicated career professionals who serve across administrations of both political parties. The Justice Department makes decisions, of course, about criminal investigations based only on the facts and the law. We do not investigate people because of their last name or their political affiliation, the size of their bank account, where they come from, or what they look like. We investigate and prosecute violations of federal law. Nothing more, nothing less. We do this not only because of the principles that have long guided our work, but because we know that our democracy cannot survive without a justice system that ensures the equal protection of law for all its citizens. The Justice Department will continue to uphold its obligations under the Constitution to fiercely defend the right of all Americans to peacefully express opinions, beliefs, and ideas. Disagreements about politics are good for our democracy. They are normal, but using conspiracy theories, falsehoods, violence, and threats of violence to affect political outcomes, not normal. The short-term political benefits to those tactics will never make up for the long-term cost to our country. Continued unfounded attacks against the Justice Department's employees are dangerous for people's safety. They're dangerous for our democracy. This must stop. I mean, it's supposed to sound authoritative, but it won't stop. I mean, the Attorney General, whom they believe to be illegitimately placed anyway, is just not someone they're going to listen to. I shouldn't belittle him. I mean, he's making the correct point from the correct stance and is doing the correct work. It's just, he should say these things. I mean, there are a few people that will be persuaded by this. But again, we're working at the margins. We're doing our best to put together a coalition of the of outright Trump opposition, along with whatever disaffected Republican voters we can get, to ensure that he doesn't win majorities in the requisite number of states. So fine, you try and do this sort of thing. But yeah, how effective will it be? It only has to change a few minds, and I guess it's capable of doing that. So anyway, I thought that was of some interest. We should at least note that he's out there making that effort. Let's see. Ooh, here's one that I think is an interesting story as well. More overarching story from Chris Geidner at Law Dork. He's made an interesting observation here to share with us. Let me get everything queued up back on the other computer screen so that we can run this place correctly. Divergent responses to judge shopping claims paint a disturbing picture. You know, we've discussed this on the show from time to time in the context of the judge shopping, particularly in the Fifth Circuit, where, if you file in certain districts of, say, the Northern District of Texas, that you would be able to, regardless of what the subject matter is and whether or not it's particularly of interest to him, you can get yourself the particular individual judge you want, whether that's Matthew Kaczmarek, is that right? Or in some cases in Louisiana, you can do the same thing. There are certain places where you go, and if you file in that district, there's only one judge, so that's who you're going to get. Or there's only two judges, so you got a 50-50 shot at it, and maybe both of them are crazy. I mean, that's the reason why Trump, when he was filing motions in federal court to try and stop the various investigations into him that were proceeding in Florida, why he chose to file in the part of Palm Beach County that he did, because he knew he would be very likely to draw Eileen Cannon. She's not the only judge in that district, but what do you know? He lucked out and got her. And then what do you know? When the criminal case was filed in Florida, in the, it's in the, what district of Florida are they? Central, Northern, Southern? I don't remember how Florida divides itself. But supposedly that was randomly assigned to Eileen Cannon, which is hard to believe, but, it's always possible. Anyway, here, Chris is pointing out, by the way, that this is done. Sometimes people are able to point to other examples and say, but both sides do it. Well, on occasion, I suppose that's probably true. But is it treated the same way? That's the important question. And he suggests that it is not. Over the past few years, he writes, there have been a torrent of stories and concerns raised about how conservative lawyers go to jurisdictions where they are guaranteed conservative judges to bring cases seeking more and more extreme right rulings. And it should probably be noted also, one of the big problems is that these are also judges who have no hesitancy about imposing what they claim, what they purport to be nationwide injunctions against whatever policy it is that they happen to be sitting in judgment of, and are saying that from some backwater corner of northern Texas, the whole country has to do just as we do here, which is doubly shaky. First, shopping for the judge, and then secondly, getting these national injunctions is a little questionable, very questionable. But as Chris puts it, this sets up a process that I've detailed previously, allowing the 6-3 conservative U.S. Supreme Court to appear more reasonable than it is by rejecting a handful of the most extreme ideas, often coming out of the federal courts in Texas and going through the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, while nonetheless moving the law ever rightward by accepting some of the lower courts' proposals. Those stories paint an ever more disturbing picture when we step back and see the full canvas. As that debate was ongoing, federal judges in Alabama, other Republican appointees, operating mostly in secret, were subjecting dozens of civil rights lawyers to a 2-year and ongoing judge shopping investigation into the motives behind their actions in 3 lawsuits challenging an anti-transgender law. In other words, I guess long story short here is when Republican activists go judge shopping and get the judge they want and have it kicked up to the circuit that they want and then kicked up to the conservatives on the Supreme Court that they want, that's all fine and dandy. But should a liberal cause find its way in front of a more liberal federal judge in the hopes of doing the same thing, or at least something similar, sending it to a circuit that will be sympathetic and then hoping that the Supreme Court doesn't intervene, I guess, that apparently will get you subjected to an investigation. How dare you go judge shopping? For those on the right, litigants, lawyers, or judges, it's a heads I win, tails you lose life right now. The Northern District of Texas, in particular, has had a system in place since September 14th, 2022, in fact, in which litigants can guarantee that a case will be assigned to a certain judge if they file in a particular division of the district. In 2 divisions, file a case there, and it will be heard by one of the most far-right judges in the nation, Judge Matthew Kaczmarek in the Amarillo division, or Judge Reed O'Connor in the Wichita Falls division. Even before then, the cases had a 95 or 85% chance of being assigned to that judge, respectively. Many far-right cases have been filed in these divisions, as well as the Fort Worth division, where O'Connor gets 45% of the cases as a result. Contrast that with the story I laid out this week in Alabama, where lawyers faced with the unexplained transfer on Friday afternoon of a holiday weekend of a case challenging the state's ban on gender-affirming medical care for minors to the judge viewed as likely the worst draw in the Northern District of Alabama. Lawyers voluntarily dismissed that case and another case, as was their client's right under federal court rules. Those actions led the judge in question, U.S. District Judge Lyles Burke, to ponder in a court order whether the lawyer's actions constituted judge shopping. The next week, some of the lawyers representing new clients filed another case, as was their right. It ended up before Burke, the very same judge. How do you like that? All right, so what happened next in these 2 districts shows the extent to which the heads I win, tails you lose mentality is reality. And I'm guessing here, by the way, it's not said, but law dork readers, I guess, are supposed to be able to surmise for themselves that the plaintiffs dismissed their own case because they magically drew the most hostile judge in the Northern District of Alabama. So you can dismiss, ask for your own case to be dismissed, and then filed again with different plaintiffs, and then poof, holy cow, it was assigned to the same guy. In the Northern District of Texas, the judges rejected a policy of the Judicial Conference of the United States establishing that challenges to federal rules or regulations would be randomly assigned among all judges in the district, not just in the division where filed. In other words, the Judicial Conference of the United States said, hey, this idea that you can always get Matthew Kaczmarek and he will always issue a nationwide injunction against anything the right wing doesn't like, that can't stand. It undermines confidence in the judicial system. Even if you file in Amarillo, we'll just randomly assign it anywhere in northern Texas. But apparently the Northern District of Texas judges said, we're not actually going to listen to the Judicial Conference of the United States. We're just not gonna. As simple as that, a national policy was announced garnering laudatory headlines. Within the month, the Northern District of Texas said no. Since then, the filing of new lawsuits in the Northern District of Texas challenging national policies has continued without district-wide random assignments. This has all gone so far that one Trump appointee, U.S. District Judge Mark Pittman, has fought back, scrapping repeatedly with the Fifth Circuit. In the Northern District of Alabama, supported by judges in the Middle District and Southern District of Alabama, the chief judges launched an inquiry where attorney-client privilege was tossed aside and lawyers were put under oath to explain their motives for making their rules-permitted actions on their client's behalf as part of a three-judge panel's investigation into the actions. The lawyers were, throughout the panel's inquiry, subject to a gag order that prevented them from talking with each other or anyone else about this. That is something. Oops, I'm a little behind on the music here, so we'll pay the price for that in just a few seconds. At any rate, no talking with each other or anyone else about this, including the media, aside from the lawyers that they had hired to represent them in the inquiry. So, in other words, the same activity that passes without comment, and in fact doesn't pass without comment. The Judicial Conference of the United States said this must end when Republicans do it. Not only does it not end, but you're in trouble if you do it as a Democrat. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We were in the middle of Chris Geidner's piece in Law Dork, pointing out, long story short, that judge shopping for Republican activists is not only A-OK, but even when the Judicial Conference of the United States says it really needs to be brought to an end, particularly, yes, right here in the Northern District of Texas, where we see what you're doing, put a stop to it. And they simply, well, you know what? We declined to put a stop to it. We're just not going to do that. We're not going to listen to you. And on top of all that, we now find out that, okay, so if some more liberal activist attorneys say, well, if you can do that, then, I mean, it would be one thing if they were even just trying to say, well, we'll bring our case in more liberal jurisdictions and ask for a more liberal judge and hope that we get a nationwide injunction against a conservative policy. That's not even what they're doing. They're challenging restrictive laws right in the district, right in the jurisdiction where they exist, which is what they have to do, and just using the rules that are allowed, that they're permitted to use to try and not have to have their case heard by the most conservative possible judge in the whole district. And maybe couldn't we get someone who's at least occasionally considered to be a fair judge, and they utilize the rules that were available to them. As Chris points out, these are perfectly legitimate tactics. You file your case, you draw a terrible judge, you have a collection of 15 plaintiffs to choose from. The first one files, and you get a terrible judge, and you say, you know what, we're not going to get anywhere with this one. It's better that we dismiss this case and bring a second one with a second plaintiff and try and get a better draw. That way we'll at least have a shot, any chance, even if it's down to the proverbial snowball in hell. We just got to get another judge. They file again. And by the way, no, you still draw the same judge. Now, you should be able to do that. If you want to, you could do it 10 times, 15 times. If you have plaintiffs, you can do it. And not only is it, it's an annoyance, I'm sure, to you and them. But apparently now, not only is that not working because they keep assigning you to the same judge randomly by some strange choice, some strange coincidence, but probably choice, yes. But on top of that, they're going to investigate you for using the rules that way. Now, you're not going to be investigated if you're a conservative using the rules to make sure you get Matthew Kaczmarek, but you will be investigated if you are a more liberal activist and you're trying to avoid being having your case crushed by a conservative biased judge in Alabama. That's pretty amazing. So, good thing to point out, and a good eye for that, Chris. Where did we leave off in reading this story? Oh, yes, right. In addition to all of this, there's a gag order preventing them from talking with anybody about it. Well, this seems outrageous. They're doing the exact same thing and punishing them because they're more liberally oriented attorneys and plaintiffs. Yeah, well, why don't they make a bigger story out of this? Well, actually, they're under a gag order. That's outrageous. How can that possibly be? I don't know. I can't discuss it with you. I'm under a gag order. 11 of the lawyers involved in Alabama trans cases are currently opposing a threat of sanctions from Burke. 11 lawyers, with a handful of those lawyers having been threatened further with the possibility of jail. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and their allies continue filing cases, meanwhile, in the Northern District of Texas, unabated. And the Fifth Circuit keeps acting to help them keep their cases there. That is the legal reality, or the reality of our legal system in 2024. Now, what's next in Alabama? In the wake of my reporting, Chris says, in the situation in Alabama, which you should take the time to read now if you haven't done so already. I guess I will. But just not right now. I got to read the rest of it. The question is, what now? There are, from my view, 3 overlapping matters that are at issue this month. Ultimately, the news tonight is the third one, but if you can, work with me to get there. All right. Does this mean I should absolutely read this other item right now? By the way, the item he's pointing to is a piece from June 5th, end of last week, saying Alabama federal judges forced LGBTQ advocates into a long, secretive inquiry, explaining exactly what's going on in this investigation. But for now, what is coming up next? There's a show cause order in effect. This is the base issue. In spite of the arguments raised in their responses, will U.S. District Judge Lyles Burke still issue sanctions against any or all of the 11 lawyers ordered to show cause why they should not be sanctioned? As I detailed previously, all of the lawyers vigorously dispute the allegations, the panel's presentation of the facts, and the applicable legal standards, as well as challenging whether they have received due process throughout all of this. The overarching question of why the rights of the parties under Rule 41 to voluntarily dismiss their case for any reason is not the beginning and end of this is yet to be answered. Subsequent questions about the other show cause order issues are wrapped up in the due process questions raised throughout, detailed extensively in a filing last month from 3 of the organizational lawyers, James Essex, Carl Charles, that's difficult enough to pronounce, but that's the name, Carl Charles, and Letitia Fawkes. But again, just to reiterate the problem here, Rule 41, the rules of civil procedure are, I guess it's pretty clear. It's linked here. If we want to read it, I don't know how lengthy Rule 41 is. It's pretty long and dense. But basically, as Chris points out here, it's pretty crystal clear that the rule is that plaintiffs may choose voluntarily to ask that their case be dismissed for any reason. I don't feel like it anymore. I think I'm wrong. I think I'm right, but I'm in front of the wrong judge. I left my wallet at home. Whatever it is, it's a motion you can make of right to dismiss your own case as the plaintiff for any reason. Can't do it and say it would be crazy to say the defendant can ask for the plaintiff's case to be dismissed for any reason. No, you got to actually, show some reason for that and win a motion. But no, as the plaintiff, you can say at any time, I quit, I want to stop, whatever it is. They don't have to let you come back later, but they do have to say, hey, you don't want to prosecute this case. Nobody else is going to do it. So, fine. it's dismissed. But apparently in Alabama, they want to now have an investigation into what is the any reason that you ask for. And isn't there any way we can turn this into a real disciplinary problem for the lawyers? No, there isn't. And yet they're doing it anyhow. As of now, the first show cause hearings are set for two of the private firm lawyers, Kathleen Hartnett and Michael Shortnacy. Is that right? Shortnacy, Shortnacy, on June 24th. So that's coming up. The remaining 9 hearings for Essex, Charles, and Falks, as well as for Jeffrey Doss, Melody Egan, Jennifer Levy, Shannon Minter, Scott McCoy, and Asaf Orr, are currently set for June 27th and 28th. Now, next section, the Q&A document, show cause order. This was the issue that prompted my initial reporting on this matter. Will Burke try to force the lawyers to turn over the document, which they assert is a protected document, protected by attorney-client privilege, by finding that the crime-fraud exception allows him or a special master to review the document? I don't know what's in the actual document. That may be made apparent in Chris's other reporting. This linked piece here in Alabama, Trump appointee is threatening to jail LGBTQ civil rights lawyers. And I guess they've got some document that the judge thinks will somehow prove that they have been gaming the system somehow by asking for their case to be dismissed, which is something that they can do of right. And he thinks that this document will allow him to point to it and say, aha, you have been doing something, and it is a fraud on the court, even though you can get your case dismissed for any reason, and it's almost impossible to establish fraud on the court. He's saying, well, I think that you should be forced to give me that document, even if you think it's protected by attorney-client privilege because of the crime-fraud exception, which is an extraordinary thing to suppose. The documented issue was prepared in response to the initial May 10th, 2022 order from the panel that the lawyers report to Alabama for a May 20th hearing about Burke's judge shopping questions. So Burke accuses them of judge shopping, which is something right-wing lawyers do all the time, and says we've got to have a hearing. And given the short time frame and the need to have counsel for the hearing, a document was created, apparently in a shared Google document or similar service, to help prepare the retained lawyer, Barry Ragsdale, about what had happened and what the lawyers thought could come up at the May 20th hearing. Of course, at the time, none of the lawyers realized that this was going to be the beginning of a multi-year process. And yet, the implication of the show cause order from Burke this year is that he needs to see the document to determine whether it was part of an effort to deceive the court. Although Burke suggested an opinion would be forthcoming at the conclusion of a hearing on the issue held on May 28th, there has not been any public order, and there have been no public filings on the issue at the 11th Circuit as of Sunday. This is an important issue of its own, but it is also notable because of the quickly approaching show cause hearings for which Burke apparently believes this document could be relevant. Hartnett is one of the lawyers named in the Q&A document show cause order, yet her underlying show cause hearing is set for just 15 days from now. Next up, the judicial notice filing. I know it's getting dense, but on May 31st, as I was preparing my report, Chris says, on the Alabama judge shopping inquiry, the two Alabama lawyers who provided the one legal team with much of their in-state expertise when these cases were being filed back in 2022, Jeffrey Doss and Melody Egan, filed with Burke a motion to have the court take judicial notice of what? Well, we'll find out. Under federal rules, courts can take judicial notice of any fact that is not subject to reasonable dispute. Okay. They must do so if presented with the information by a party, as happened here. So the question here is, what are Doss and Egan seeking to have Burke take judicial notice of, and why does it matter? And here a screen grab, I guess, from their filing. Respondents request that this court take judicial notice of the following court records in United States versus Williamson in the Northern District of Alabama, which were identified, accessed, and reviewed by respondents following the May 23rd, 2024 status conference. And here, a listing of where you can find this case in order to take note of it. What is this? It's the trial that the panel told the lawyers at the May 20th, 2022 hearing was the reason why U.S. District Judge Anna Marie Axon transferred the first filed case challenging the ban, that case being the Ladinsky case. Why did she transfer it to Burke, who that day had been assigned the second filed case, Walker, after it was transferred to the Northern District from the Central District for some strange reason by U.S. District Judge Emily Marks? All three of these judges, Axon, Burke, and Marks, are Trump appointees. Well, here's how the panel, U.S. District Judges Keith Watkins and David Proctor, both George W. Bush appointees, and U.S. District Judge Jeffrey Beaverstock, a Trump appointee, introduced the transfer in its final report of inquiry in October of 2023. On April 15th, 2022, Judge Axon was presiding over day 4 of a criminal trial with multiple defendants, which at the time of trial was anticipated to last more than 2 weeks. So, at 4:41 p.m., considering the pending motion for a preliminary injunction in Walker and the pressing claims for injunctive relief in the Ladinsky complaint, Judge Axon transferred Ladinsky to Judge Burke in the interest of efficiency and judicial economy. Later, the report detailed the way the panel initially presented the transfer to the lawyers at the May 2022 hearing. The panel explained at the May 20th hearing that Judge Axon transferred Ladinsky because she was then on day 4 of what was scheduled to be a 2-week plus criminal trial, an 18-defendant case with 4 defendants at trial and quite a lot of moving parts in that criminal case. And based upon judicial efficiency and economy, Judge Burke took the case. Judge Axon would not have had the judicial resources to start the case right away. It was a simple determination that we would have the judge who could handle the case and wasn't in a long criminal trial to handle that case. In its final report, the panel went on to chastise the lawyers that even if counsel had questions about that process, those questions did not even come close to justifying counsel's wholly unwarranted suspicions regarding why the case was assigned to Judge Burke. Of course, it doesn't really matter which judge it was assigned to or why it was assigned to that judge. If they ask to dismiss their case, they have that right. The end. Normally. Finally, the panel asserted that the misconduct of the lawyers included claiming that the dismissal was because Judge Axon did not explain the reassignment of Ladinsky, and Judge Burke set Walker for a status conference in Huntsville on April 18th. In sum, according to the panel, Axon transferred Ladinsky to Burke at 4:41 p.m. Friday, April 15th, 2022, because Axon was on day 4 of what was scheduled to be a 2-week plus criminal trial, and questioning that reassignment was offensive enough to be misconduct all by itself. The docket numbers cited in Dawson Egan's filing, however, show that the Williamson jury, the one they wanted the judge to take judicial notice of, the Williamson jury was already in deliberations before Axon transferred Ladinsky to Burke. What's more, the verdict was reached by 3:50 p.m. the next deliberation day, Monday, April 18th. So there wasn't going to be a 2-week plus criminal trial happening. They were already in deliberations, and it took them a day. Docket number 601, cited by Dawson Egan, is the verdict. The other 3 docket numbers are the transcripts of the Williamson trial from April 14th, 15th, and 18th, 2022. Notably, on April 15th, Axon oversaw the closing statements and sent the jury into deliberations at 2:15 p.m. This is why the time matters. So the jury had been in deliberation for more than 2 hours. It had already been over for more than 2 hours at the time that she said, well, I'm judicially overwhelmed. I have to send your case to Well, as it happens, the most conservative, most anti-LGBTQ judge in the district. Okay, and here's the transcript. 2:15 p.m., the court saying, "Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. At this time, I'm going to allow you to adjourn back to the deliberations room. We will bring you the evidence. You'll be able to consider the redacted superseding indictment and the indictments, blah, 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 blah." All to say, jury out at 2:15 p.m. And on Monday, April 18th, the jury was brought back into the courtroom after reaching its verdict at 3:50 p.m. So there you go. So Friday, 2:15, go to the jury room. Clearly, they're not going to do a great deal of deliberating, it being Friday at 2 o'clock already. But the point is that Monday at 3:50 p.m., they're back in the courtroom having reached a verdict. It was basically one day of deliberations. And here a transcript that reflects this. Now, why does this matter? The judicial notice filing reiterated that Rule 41 should make all of this irrelevant. In other words, it doesn't matter why you want your cases dismissed. That's your right. But it goes on. The panel provided an explanation during the hearing and in its final report of inquiry about why the case was transferred to this court, to the conservative Judge Burke, adding that the panel then referenced that explanation as grounds for misconduct findings for the final report of inquiry. Then the judicial notice filing stated, if this court is inclined to examine the respondent's motivations for dismissing Ladinsky, the court records cited above regarding Williamson should be considered as well. In short, the filing essentially says, if you're going to consider this claim, which again, you shouldn't because of Rule 41, well, then let's actually look at this claim. This information raises questions about the panel's story that Axon was concerned about a 2-week trial when she transferred Ladinsky to Burke, because the trial was already to the jury. To be sure, Axon didn't know that the jury would reach a verdict the next day. But the lawyers for Dawson Egan want to make sure that it's on the record, before Burke moves forward with this, that Axon transferred the case to Burke more than 2 hours after the trial that allegedly was the reason she needed to transfer the case had gone to the jury. To be clear, this is about the panel. From all that I can gather, Axon has never said any of what the panel claimed publicly. As such, all of this reasoning is primarily attributable to the panel at this point. If read with knowledge about the status of Williamson at the time of the Ladinsky transfer, moreover, the panel's language is extremely carefully worded. It is at least notably incomplete. This information adds another layer of questions about the panel's behavior in this inquiry, which it repeatedly insisted was not adversarial, and in its report, which in turn raises additional questions about how much Burke can and should rely upon that report as he considers what to do now. Ultimately, as I reviewed all of this, it served as a reminder of how closed off this whole investigation has been from public scrutiny, and as a warning to all about why that's such a big problem. I know it's a little dense, lots of legalese, but I think at bottom you can grasp the picture here. In other words, judicial shopping, A-OK for conservative plaintiffs, and we'll investigate you if you try to do anything even approaching, not just you, there's no chance you're going to get a friendly judge in the Northern District of Alabama. You just don't want to be assigned, quote unquote, randomly, repeatedly to the same worst possible judge, especially if the excuse for transferring cases that have in fact been assigned to different judges turn out to be BS. That's what it comes down to. And it's all happening behind the curtain, I guess, down in Alabama, because all of the lawyers involved and being investigated are on top of all this insane investigation under gag orders. That's pretty amazing. So a good spot by Chris Geidner here, and bringing some news that will tend to be underreported to your attention. And that's the point of the program here today. All right, let's see. Other developments over the past day or so that we haven't gotten to that, well, hell, if we don't get to them, then in all likelihood, justice will, because they're on everybody's minds, and they've been a big story over the past couple of days, and it might be something that you have caught wind of. But let's see, I think both Alitos, Martha Ann and the one who's actually serving on the Supreme Court, Sam, have been taped in recent days, or we've found out in the last day or so that they've been taped. Whether they were taped most recently, I don't know. I can't recall all the details of this, but both Sam Alito caught on tape and Martha Ann caught on tape in the last couple of days as well. Basically, revealing the same bias that everybody has been pointing out as having been rather obvious over the past couple of, decades, I guess at this point. Rolling Stone, I believe, actually had both stories, and now I realize that I don't have the Martha Ann Alito one close at hand, but I think that if we search the, if it will, who knows whether it'll open up Blue Sky's deck, but maybe I'll have to do it in the old school web interface and see if I can find it, because I'm pretty sure I commented on it somewhere along the way. Yeah. Whether or not it leads directly back to the second, there it is, the second Rolling Stone story or not, we will find out. But I think we got it here. Let's see. The first one is under the title of Justice Alito caught on tape discussing how battle for America, quote, can't be compromised. This one ran in Rolling Stone under the byline from Tessa Stewart and Tim Dickinson. And this one, a little complicated and a little iffy in that it is essentially longest story down to the shortest nub of a story I can give you is that the justice was prompted at some appearance somewhere. Well, essentially, wouldn't you say you agree with the following statement? Conservative, conservative, conservative. But it was by a plant, essentially. But someone doing undercover journalistic type work, apparently. Trying to get to him to see, trying to see whether Alito would push back at all against a extremely conservatively framed set of questions. And he did not. Now, what makes it interesting is, still interesting, despite the fact that these are not Alito's words per se, is that the same questions were put to Chief Justice Roberts, and he did, in fact, take the opportunity to push back, which is also of interest, whereas Alito did not. But the basics upshot of it here is Justice Samuel Alito spoke candidly about the ideological battle between the left and the right, discussing the difficulty of living peacefully, quote, peacefully, that's kind of scary, with ideological opponents in the face of fundamental differences that can't be compromised. He endorsed what his interlocutor described as a necessary fight to, quote, return our country to a place of godliness, which is not what you want to be on record as saying. And Alito offered a blunt assessment of how America's polarization will ultimately be resolved. One side or the other is going to win. Which, he doesn't say which one, so it's not the worst quote in the world. And yeah, I guess ultimately one side is going to win, and that's just a statement of fact. But Alito made the remarks in conversation at the Supreme Court Historical Society's annual dinner on June 3rd, a function that is known to right-wing activists as an opportunity to buttonhole Supreme Court justices. That's true. We've heard about that. His comments were recorded by Lauren Windsor. That's the person we were talking about here. Lauren is a liberal documentary filmmaker That's how she's described here. Windsor attended the dinner as a dues-paying member of the society under her real name. It wasn't undercover, per se, along with a colleague. So that was the wrong word for it, undercover. She was open about it, but I guess they just didn't see it coming for whatever reason. She asked questions of the justice as though she were a religious conservative. In that sense, somewhat undercover, but her name is out there. The justice's unguarded comments highlight the degree to which Alito makes little effort to present himself as a neutral umpire calling judicial balls and strikes, but rather as a partisan member of a hard-right judicial faction that's empowered to make life-altering decisions for every American, which is actually a pretty good description of who they are and what they do. So, we'll be right back with more after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. Well, welcome back, everyone, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Joan McCarter returning triumphantly after a brief absence, and welcome back. And good to get an update. Bathroom renovation work almost complete. Any chance there'll be noise in the background from it today, or not? Not yet.
Probably the noisy stuff, the tile cutting, the sanding the walls. That's all done. So
okay,
it's probably going to be pretty quiet today.
Okay, so maybe a couple knocks, pings, and what have you. Just,
yeah.
The things you got to live with during a renovation.
Well, I'm upstairs. The doors are closed, so I think we'll probably be okay. And the cats, importantly.
Yeah, right. They could knock something off at any, off a shelf at any point if they want to be heard. So, okay. Well, we've updated everybody on the extremely important stuff happening on the floor of the House today. Suspension bills of all kinds, including the WIPPES Act, which is, I was astonished to find that there was such a acronym.
How did I miss the WIPPES Act? My goodness.
I know, and it's very important, and it's true. It's one of those issues you have locally all over the country. There's stuff you shouldn't be flushing down the toilet, America. And although one of the things you should be flushing down the toilet is this House of Representatives, you should not have the opportunity to do that if it will affect the plumbing of your neighbors. And there needs to be some very clear labeling about what you can and cannot flush down the toilet, and we're going to use the time of the United States House of Representatives to fix that. Ordinarily, the sort of thing you would say is government overreach, but I guess a Republican's toilet broke somewhere, and now you got to do something. Oh, actually, that's a big issue for Donald Trump, isn't it?
This is less than awful, to be honest.
I mean, nothing wrong with that. You should beware of flushing this down the toilet. It probably is. I didn't even look at who the sponsors were.
Altoa is
okay. Okay.
Co-sponsor for Democrats. So yeah.
Okay.
It's okay.
That could be a pro-fish policy. We don't want toxic wipes in the water system because something salmon fisheries. That could absolutely be the case. So
it is rather discouraging that this is a thing that has to be, told to people.
Right. And that there will be people that say, it's my right to flush this down the toilet or something. And of course, Donald Trump makes a big deal out of toilets all the time. He can't figure out why the toilets are unable to handle someone as, petite and delicate as him when it comes to. All right. At any rate, look, it should say that on the package.
Today is not that crazy.
No.
Tomorrow, however.
Oh, well, I was wondering about what else might be coming. I only saw the daily. There's a weekly preview, of course. So I guess you've already read that. What's happening, and is it happening by suspension also?
It is not happening by suspension.
Oh,
it is the vote to hold Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress.
Okay, I guess that explains the appearance of his op-ed in the Washington Post today.
Yes.
This is all a travesty. Okay, so voting to hold Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress, that's one of the more useless things. And I'm sure it's not worrying him in terms of its effectiveness because, of course, the upshot is they'll call him up and say, will you prosecute yourself? I'll get back to you on that one.
Yeah.
All right. But yeah, in order,
it'll be referred to a U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia who will say, this is ridiculous.
Yeah. He just works a few floors down.
He will dismiss it, and the Republicans will take it to court.
Right.
And nothing will be decided before the election, if ever.
Yeah, well, although it would be something if suddenly the Supreme Court was like, no, we must act with dispatch in this and decide it before the election. Hurry, hurry, hurry.
Well, it would still have to go through the First Circuit, District.
No, reach down and grab it. Yeah, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeal. So through the local district court, and then would get, I guess, if they had a issue on which they could latch onto and kick it up to the D.C. Circuit, which would then kick it up to the Supreme Court. But I don't know. Or maybe the whole thing gets preempted by some sort of flag. If Martha Ann Alito puts out a flag that says intervene now, and someone sees it, well, they're just going to have to intervene. So, all right. So that's tomorrow. That's a big live floor vote. Is it tomorrow or is it later in the week?
Well, later in the week,
don't know, I guess.
There's only tomorrow or Thursday.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So.
What am I saying? You're speaking as though they work Monday through Friday. No.
No,
wrong.
They come in at noon today?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Some of these guys will start, someone will begin speaking at noon today. The rest of them will begin arriving 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then, they're out of there by Thursday afternoon. So it's
That's
Tuesday.
The usual, yes.
Okay. It may carry over into Thursday, but if they've told everybody Wednesday, then I believe that that's something that they can hardly wait to get to. They're excited by it.
It's kind of fun to see mild-mannered Merrick Garland finally getting a little salty about these things.
It's very little, but that's the way he is. He's not going to get cantankerous about it. Not in public, anyway. And I don't know what he's like in private, but I think he's pretty even-keeled in private as well. So, yeah.
The head of the legislative affairs for the Justice Department, Carlos Uriarte, is a bit more salty.
He's got the license to do that.
He's got license to do it. And his latest is a letter to Jim Jordan blasting him basically for his conspiracy theories about how the Department of Justice controlled the Manhattan District Attorney.
Yeah.
And this whole conviction of Trump was a DOJ election interference ploy. This is coming from the House Judiciary Chairman.
That's pretty disappointing.
The Justice Department has to write him to say, quote, the department has no control over the district attorney, just as the district attorney has no control over the department. This is how stuff works legally in the United States, you bonehead.
Yeah. You would have, of course, reviewed that day one in law school, That's how it works. But never mind all that. There's a massive conspiracy.
Didn't go to law school, did he?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. I assumed.
I
Well,
mean,
he went to wrestling
he
school.
just got to be chair of the Judiciary Committee because, of course,
Yeah, he's
they
a
knew
wrestler.
that he, not because he's.
Yeah, I don't really know what his training is.
Constitutional expert, but because he's
a
combative
combative jackass. Yeah, and there's only there's only so many places you can put him because he won't wear a coat. So, Judiciary Committee. Yeah, I don't really know actually what his,
he's a wrestler.
That much I remember. Yeah.
Master's in education. Oh, he does have.
Hey, all right. Well, good for you.
Huh.
He went and picked one up.
Capital University Law School.
That's unfamiliar to me, but, who knows?
And he never took the bar exam.
Oh, well, that's a very hard exam. So you don't want to take it if you don't have to. Was it okay? I mean, it's the point of going to law school is to become a lawyer, but I guess at that point he must have anticipated a career in politics. And yeah, that's not a bad idea, picking up a degree in generally how law works. And I don't know why, really, honestly, after you spend the money on that, take the bar exam, pass it, even if you have to take it a couple times. That happens with people. You should do the part that, enables you to say, I am a lawyer, not just, well, I went to law school. Like, are you a lawyer? I went to law school. I didn't even go to law school. I mean, I did, but you wouldn't have to go to law school to know that was an evasive answer, sir. What do you mean? I need to do some digging. So, but Capital University Law School in Columbus, Ohio, which makes a great deal of sense as he's from Ohio.
Yes.
You go locally. That makes good sense. It's good to get the training. We just there's no objective measure like a bar exam that says, did you remember any of this? And evidently not, because a trained lawyer who would then pass the bar exam would say, oh yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing to say, but no, the Manhattan District Attorney and the jury that he impanels will not be under the direct control of the U.S. Department of Justice. That's just not a thing. But
it's not a thing.
Okay.
And Jordan knows that.
Yes. He may very well remember it, despite not taking the bar exam.
Worth the Department of Justice saying, you idiot, publicly.
Yeah. And reminding people even who might not originally have reason to know that it's the case. And I'm sure the Republicans are salivating at the prospect, of course, of charging him with contempt of Congress and then they know that he's not going to prosecute it, but they, I'm sure, intend to point to that and say, see, we told you the Department of Justice controls everything. Well, that's a federal case right here in D.C. Yeah, they're going to control it to some extent. It doesn't mean that every case everywhere in every court is mysteriously being controlled by one guy in Washington. No. Sorry. But, all right. They intend to charge ahead with that anyway. And I guess we know how they'll spend their week. So, okay. That's something to anticipate, to say the least. Along with the WIPPES Act, of course.
Along with the WIPPES Act, which we are okay with.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty good one. It's just a little funny sounding.
It's better than hands off our home appliances.
Yes, that's true. Right. Although that's probably something. That's amazing, all by itself. And I wonder if they'll add the toilets to the panoply here. They're trying to control our stoves and refrigerators and light bulbs and toilets, and that's to some extent true, the low flush toilets. But this is a different aspect of it. But apparently also electric boats, got to have none of those because they'll sink and you'll get eaten by a shark.
Yes.
And it's clearly true, even though electric boats have actually been around for quite some time. And this is how it got to be the case that Donald Trump never figured out that boats can carry heavy objects without sinking I don't know, but this is not something he was paying attention to. What can I tell you? What else happening here today? Alito's
Well, I'm going
and
to go back
flags.
to Alito a little
All
bit.
right, let's
Just
do
a
it.
little bit.
I knew that would interest you.
And that interview, and the part that hasn't really gotten as much attention as a focus is that interjection when he's talking about, both sides and eventually the Christian nationalists are going to have to take over. He said something about living together peacefully. It would be great if we could live together peacefully.
Yeah, but since we can't.
I really just sort of homed in on that one word and freaked out.
Yeah.
Because here's a Supreme Court justice suggesting that this is something that we have a civil war over?
Or at the very least, some violence. It's going to happen.
Would be justified?
Guess that's certainly,
and that coming in concert with Steve Bannon saying something like, "We will hunt you down," talking about law enforcement personnel, talking about McCabe and James Comey. We will hunt you down for your sins against Donald Trump.
Yeah.
When you have a Supreme Court justice not so subtly endorsing that idea, that's pretty scary.
Yes, I should say so. Oh, well, is that French? Everyone always says that. I don't think that really is, but I'll pardon it. You'll get a pardon from me once I'm president.
All right, thank you.
And
we're not on radio anymore.
Right. So. We don't even really need the pardon per se, but all the kids who are tuning in for the latest Alito information will be astonished. And I'm sorry, kids, but that's the reality of it. Yeah, it's worth pointing out. I mean, it makes you wonder, for instance, if there were such a thing to happen, right? Well, what if somebody takes him at his word, Bannon at his word, and hunts down some of their targets, and however the violence manifests itself, and then, of course, the legal system intervenes. It is still nominally against the law to hunt down and injure, wound, kill, threaten, what have you. Federal officials, certainly, but private citizens of any sort. This is why we have a society and rule of law. But supposing a case were brought to them and they made the claim, well, it's true that I hunted down these ex-FBI officials for perceived grievances articulated, to the extent he can articulate anything, by Donald Trump. But it's impossible to live peacefully with these people, as Justice Alito well knows. And you appeal your case, or appeal your conviction. Is it possible that you could convince the 5 necessary justices that this idea of criminally charging someone who murdered someone that Donald Trump doesn't like, I don't know if you really have a case. It might be impossible to live peacefully with people, in which case, what can I do? It's an impossibility. We're going to have to dismiss the case. It's a little weird. It's a little scary.
It's a lot scary.
Yes. Worse than flags. But to the extent that flags are indications that this might happen. Right. And now, of course, the suggestion that Martha Alito will make flags that essentially say, I'm okay if my husband wants to help dismiss criminal charges against people because it's impossible to live with them peacefully. I can't even tolerate my neighbors having a sign about someone else. So, yeah, it's definitely worrisome. And, there is the caveat in the Alito piece that a provocateur of sorts shows up and tries to, essentially lays out these words and say, do you agree? And he says, yeah, I do agree. But then, of course, he does take the opportunity to say, and let me tell you why. I agree because it's actually true. And then there's the contrasting example of John Roberts, who says, oh, no. Wait a minute. You can't just lay that out there and have me say, yeah, and nod at you in passing and then attribute those words to me. I'm going to stop you. And, essentially have that John McCain moment. No, you're not allowed to say that the president is a foreign terrorist. That's not real. You have to dissuade yourself of that. Roberts does that. That's good. Alito says, actually, you got a point. So that's not great.
Which makes you wonder how the deliberations on Trump immunity are going.
Yeah, right.
Just as an aside.
No, that's absolutely got to be tops on your mind. That I do wonder about that. And I wonder sometimes whether Alito, it's one thing for Alito to tell someone that he thinks is a fan at a private function this. Does he stand up in deliberations to the Chief Justice saying, you guys, we can't do that. That's crazy. Does he stand up and say, crazy or not, we have the opportunity to do it. I think we should take it. I'm curious how deliberations go and whether Justice or the Chief says, well, as long as I have 5 who say it's crazy, I guess I can let Alito rant. No harm done. But until I get a 5th.
Apparently, he hasn't done anything about Alito thus far.
Right. And he won't even agree that he should answer for himself.
Dick Durbin tried to get him to do something about Alito, which, by the way, come on, Dick Durbin, what is it going to take?
Yeah, I don't know what he thinks I know he thinks he can't make anything, force anything to happen. But, as many people have pointed out, well, you don't have to actually win on the substantive point of dragging someone before Congress. If they refuse, they refuse. But make them refuse.
Make them refuse and have lots of public televised hearings about these things.
Now you have that
John Roberts and Samuel Alito are refusing to come talk to you about.
Yes. And if it worries you that it's going to take time away from important judicial nominations, which maybe, you could have a subcommittee have the hearings.
Yes, and you could put Sheldon Whitehouse in charge of that.
Oh, yeah, you could do that. That's right. And he at least, he knows what's going on. I know that he's telling Dick Durbin, and I'm sure somewhere along the line Dick Durbin recognizes what's going on, but he's just not disposed to have the same kinds of fights that maybe Whitehouse might be a little bit more amenable to, even if he...
A lot more amenable to. Oh, right. In fact, today on the House side, there is because it's the minority who's doing it, Jamie Raskin and AOC are organizing a roundtable discussion of Supreme Court ethics at which Sheldon Whitehouse will be a key panelist.
Oh. And they can do that because it's just a roundtable. We have room at the table. It's just a round
table. They can't actually hold a hearing because they are in the minority, but they're doing what they can.
Yes.
In the absence of Durbin doing it.
All right.
I'm getting very frustrated with Dick Durbin again, as usual.
What? No way. Yeah, that's a long-standing issue. Interesting that they've decided to frame it as a roundtable. They can't hold a hearing because they're not the majority. They don't control those things. But interesting contrast to sort of throw it into the Wayback Machine here. Under the same circumstances years ago, John Conyers facing similar issues. Again, I think also over contempt of Congress and subpoena power. But from the minority at that point, he essentially did the same thing, but he did attempt to give it all the trappings of a hearing and call it a hearing. And he was kind of called out on it by the majority. It wasn't a major problem or anything. I guess maybe they're conscious of that and saying, all right, well, we'll call ours a roundtable. We're not going to attempt to pretend it's a hearing. But the visuals, I'm sure, will simply still be the same. Mahogany paneling and flags and whatnot.
Right.
Nameplates, et cetera, so that you might mistake it for a hearing. But
it will also be live streamed. I'm not sure when it starts, but it is today.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope they wait until after we're done.
I hope so too.
And then we get a chance to watch it. It'll be interesting to see, and that's that's a powerful and persuasive group that they've put together just among the three names that you've mentioned so far. So I'll take a look for the results.
Raskin is very good at this.
Yeah,
AOC is very good at getting attention.
Mm-hmm. And she frames the issues fairly well.
She does.
In her own
No,
right.
I didn't mean that dismissively.
No, I didn't really believe that you did.
She's good at her job. But,
Yeah.
Luckily she's also high profile enough that media may be paying some attention to her.
Right. She's not Nancy Mace. She's actually substantively understands not only what she's doing, but intuitively how to explain it to people who aren't daily Congress watchers. So,
right.
A good translator.
And she's not doing it, to be an influencer. I don't know exactly why Nancy Mace is doing it, but it's not about the policy making.
No, that's the case with Mace, certainly. All right. So we'll be on the lookout for this. That'll tell us a little bit about what's the thinking on Capitol Hill, even if they, if it isn't something they can actually, just lay down the law and get somebody booted off the court. It doesn't work like that. But maybe I should, I'll call in. I should have gone to this roundtable to say, I have a question about what if you guys just held judicial nominations and confirmation votes right now for Supreme Court justices, despite the fact that there's no vacancy. There was no vacancy when you held the hearings for Justice Jackson. I mean, there was a planned vacancy, but there was no vacancy yet. So what's the difference? And why don't you just do 100 of them right now? The next 100 Supreme Court justices. I mean, we've discussed the possibility before. No one has taken it seriously to date, but maybe the round table is the place to do it. And if you're looking to be bipartisan,
you got to start someplace, and if you want to start building a case for when Democrats are in control, and you could possibly impeach a Supreme Court justice, you start building the case.
Sure.
And you start doing it in the House.
I guess the sooner the better. I mean, so that it comes as less as a shock to people when you actually have to pull the trigger on it. It's a pretty vague standard.
Yeah. You got to start.
Right. I mean, the Constitution itself, if you care about what the document says, and I think that's supposedly in fashion with one group, although, if it becomes inconvenient, they'll dismiss it, no doubt. But all it does say is that you're entitled to retain the position during periods of good behavior. So, ask around. Is this good behavior? Is this what we wanted out of Supreme Court justices? Answering interview questions like this, flying FU flags to their neighbors, what have you. I don't know.
Taking millions of dollars in gifts.
That's
lavish trips and who knows what else. This is the only the stuff he reported, by the way.
Oh, yes, right. And now Alito, he's taking plenty of his own, but back to the Thomas description. Yes. But I was kind of astonished coming out of the weekend, the latest ProPublica reporting. No revelations there. I was just sort of astonished at how it all set up. That this idea that they could be sitting on the beach at Sea Island Resort saying, how did I get to be hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt? Well, maybe this resort, or the fact that you're on vacation at this resort, having last month borrowed, quote unquote, $250,000 to buy an RV because you said that's the way you preferred to go on vacation. It's parked at home and you're at Sea Island. Problem one. I don't think you're spending your money wisely. But I have to let him off the hook on that because I'm pretty sure he understood from the beginning. No, that's not a loan. That's a bribe. I can go to Sea Island in good conscience. I haven't wasted $250,000 on an RV. It was free. Oh, all right. Well, that's a little different. Still not great and worth looking into, to say the least.
Yes.
All right.
But let's start with Alito.
Sure.
Because he's really the dangerous one here.
Hot and in the news and definitely.
And with violence.
Yeah, that's bad. I understood that to be the wrong thing. And if you're into the rule of law And one guy's idea of the rule of law is let's not have law rule so much as use it as a tool to persecute my personal and political enemies. That's not the kind of good behavior we were thinking of for a lifetime appointment. All right. So let's keep an eye out for that. And I guess the round table will figure out when that starts, and we'll know what happens afterwards. And could be something we can discuss next week.
It could possibly be, or, maybe we'll have another Alito flag or interview or.
Right. Yeah.
We'll definitely have more Supreme Court cases. They've added Fridays.
Oh, yes. Right. And there's some, huge number of cases yet still to be announced. This is
all the biggies. So Thursdays and Fridays.
Okay. Well, we'll keep an eye out for that. That's a warning. The rest of us have to work Thursday and Friday. Congress, maybe they get a heads up that some horribly controversial decision is coming. They can hop on the planes and get out of town before whatever hits the fan actually hits. Okay. Well, thanks very much for coming by. Good to hear that things are progressing on the renovations as well.
We might have a toilet downstairs today. Just might.
See, I knew that was relevant to the WIPPES Act somehow.
Yes.
And now you'll know.
Down which we will not flush wipes.
And you don't need federal bureaucrats to tell you, but if they did, that would be nice too. Thanks very much. What's the problem? Print this on the label. What's the problem with that? I don't know. We'll see whether anybody objects. If you all tune in and find out what happens in the debate on the WIPPES Act, you heard it here first. Well, second, because we heard it from someone else. Thanks, Joan.
You're most welcome.
We'll check back in, and all the important toilet news wrapped up neatly with a bow. Thanks for coming by.
From networksradio.com.
Okay, will do.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
That's right, and next with Justice Putnam, of course, you'll be listening to the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And they, too, will, I'm sure, be focusing on all the toilet-related news, but also the decision by the right-wing Georgia Appellate Court to stop the continued prosecution of Trump until they issue their appellate rulings. Well, that raises some serious questions.